I had boxes at my feet and a lie on my lips. Just a few weeks, Mom, Eric said, dropping another box in my hallway. His voice was easy, like it belonged to a man who did not owe anyone anything. Tasha smiled beside him. Her smile was the kind that stayed too long. I watched them carry in a couch that swallowed my living room. They moved with a plan I thought was for a new life, but it was a plan in my house. Before they came, I had imagined I would love watching my son take care of me in my old home. I had saved that small, warm hope like a coin in my pocket. The coin felt heavy now. I greeted them at the door and tried to be kind. I made coffee and set the kettle on. The steam rose like a small surrender. Tasha said thank you with bright teeth. Eric ruffled my hair like I was younger than I was. We'll be out fast, he said. You'll barely notice. I set their plates on the table, watching them mark territory with forks and laughter. I noticed how they placed a large photograph face down on the mantel. My wife's picture. They gave me reasons for everything: storage, convenience, cost. The reasons were thin things. They bent like paper when you pressed. When they left for the hardware store, I sat in the quiet and thought about the pockets of my life someone else could fill. My hands wandered to the old firefighter badge on the shelf. I had worn it for 35 years. It felt like a second skin. The house had been mine for 20 years. I had paid for it with steady work and small joys. I had never expected to feel like a guest in my own home. Before I closed my eyes that night, I tapped the badge twice. A small ritual. Just a few weeks, Eric had said. It sounded like a promise. It sounded like a thin rope. The room felt smaller. I pressed my hand to the badge and whispered, "Not if I can help it." Then I slept with the porch light on and a worry in my chest. If anyone asked later what time it was, I would tell them then. I thought, please subscribe and write in the comments what time it is where you are now, because this is where the story begins. The house changed slow and quick at the same time. Within days, Eric and Tasha's things had spread like spilled grain. My photographs came down. My wife's picture was boxed and tucked under the bed. In its place hung a painting that looked like a storm. Tasha called it modern. Eric called it clean. I called it empty. They made small rules first. Shoes at the door. No visitors after 9. They moved my tools from the garage into a plastic bin labeled donations. My hand itched for a wrench the day they gave it away. When I asked about my tools, Eric said, "We're making room." He smiled like a man who had already decided. Tasha hummed in the kitchen while she rewired the light switches. She kept to a schedule and a list. I had always liked lists. I liked them differently when they were mine. Their voices grew louder in the house. They planned new paint and new locks. I watched them talk about colors I did not know. "It'll feel like our place," Tasha told me, and her eyes flicked to the master bedroom. Eric explained the plan for joint ownership over dinner, how they would submit forms, how they would save money. He suggested that I should relax. "I'm helping," he said. It sounded like a promise again. I found things moved. My reading lamp sat in the garage. My slippers were on the porch. The front door had a new mat. I felt small surprises like traps, a scented candle here, a decorative bowl there, soft claims in stealthy places. I ate dinner at the side table while Eric and Tasha used the big one. The television sat between them like a referee. I tried to be invisible. They made that easy. When my mail stopped coming the next week, I thought it must have been the postal strike. I called the post office and was told my address still received letters. The answer stayed in my throat like a bitter pill. At night, I lay awake and mapped the house in my head. Where they slept, where they kept the car keys. I was not angry the first week. I was puzzled. I told myself they would go soon. The house hummed with a strange new life. It felt like a rented place where the tenant left a photo of themselves on the mantel and asked me to like it. I reached for my favorite pen and bumped a lock. My desk drawer had a new padlock on it. The metal surprised me. I had never locked that drawer in my life. I sat with my hand on the wood and stared at the little brass ring. Later, when Eric walked by, I asked about it. "Oh, that?" Eric said. He shrugged and fiddled with the keys in his pocket. "Keeping the grandkids Out of your junk. He laughed like it was a joke. I blinked at him. I did not have grandkids. Not yet. The laugh waited for me to join. I did not. I tried the door of the drawer, and the metal resistance felt like a small betrayal. That drawer had my wife's letters, her grocery lists, my plane tickets from when we were younger. I pressed my palm flat on the wood as if I could feel their memory through it. A small, hot ache moved behind my ribs. All afternoon, I tried to remember why I felt so unsettled. My life had always been private in small rooms. My toolbox, my drawer, my chair by the window. They had taken private things and made them public or locked them away. Tasha told me I could get a new drawer at the weekend market. Eric said they were only protecting me from losing things. The words kept circling like flies. That night, I lay on the couch and thought about small fires. The ones in houses I had run into when I was younger. Smoke, screams, the iron heat that left your lungs raw. I had run toward those fires without a thought. I had saved mothers and fathers, babies and men who had thought the world might end. I had never imagined needing to save myself from my own living room. I worried that locking a drawer would be the first step to locking me out. I felt a slow, quiet rage. It was not loud. It sat like a small animal under my ribs, licking its paws. My hands shook as I made tea. I told myself to do nothing yet. To plan. To watch. To record small things on paper. For the first time in a long time, the badge on the shelf felt steady under my fingers. The mail used to be a small ritual. I would walk to the box, feel the weight of envelopes, and wonder what the day would hold. Weeks passed, and the box sat light. The bills I paid were still paid, but letters from the bank and notices did not arrive. I began to see the gaps like missing teeth when I checked the mailbox. At dinner, Tasha said we had changed the forwarding. It's easier for tracking invoices, she told me. Her voice was smooth. Eric nodded like a man making a list. When I told them the post office said no such forwarding request existed, they exchanged small looks. Must have been a mistake, Eric said. I felt the panic like a cold hand. I sat and wrote down dates in a small notebook I had kept since my firefighter days. I dated the missing mail and wrote what I expected. Pension statements, bank notices, insurance forms. Each line made the hole wider. I made calls from the library computer under a name that wasn't mine. I had learned some things about being careful. I learned more about how people let words slide away when it suits them. When the bank letter came weeks later, not to me, but to Eric Davis, homeowner, my knees buckled a little. It named the owner of my house by a name that was not mine. My name had been shorthand for many things, work, loyalty, stubbornness, but on the paper it was missing. Someone had used ink to change a life. I kept going through motions that day like a man walking through a maze. I made coffee. I locked the back door. I called Deputy Frank Coleman. He was my old buddy from the station who became a sheriff's deputy. He answered like a friend answers when you say one word. Trouble. Keep your head down, he said. Let me set a trap. I hung up with a plan taking shape. They had crossed a line with my mail. That line could be turned into a trail if I was careful. When I checked the county site with Frank, my stomach turned. There was a request for a deed transfer form for my property. The applicant, Eric Davis. I read the entry 3 times, thinking the screen was lying. My name had been armored in law for 20 years, and now a request had been logged with someone else's name. The small print made my chest tight. Forgery looked easy on a bright screen. Frank came by that afternoon. He parked his cruiser down the block and walked in like a good neighbor. He looked at the county printout, then at my face. His jaw tightened the way it used to when we read a tough call on a pager. They've started, he said. You did the right thing calling me. The words hit me like an old bell. I had called the right person. We went through things slow and clean. We checked property records, cross-checked dates, circled odd signatures. Eric had forged my initials on a co-ownership draft. The signature had my name but not my pen. The script traced the right letters, but lacked a hand that had trembled with firefights and late nights. Frank set his jaw and made a quiet plan. We'll backtrack this, he said. We'll gather everything. I sat in the kitchen with the badge cold in my palm. The house felt like a theater set. They had moved in and moved things around to make the play convincing. I thought of small fires and how fast smoke masked the truth. I thought of how many times my crew had called me brave for walking into the hot place and pulling people out. Bravery felt very private. I felt foolish for forgetting to be brave in my own life. That night, I took my old flip phone and made a list on paper. Bank statements, mail dates, the padlock, the deed request, the bright new couch. Each line was a small discovery. I taped the county printout inside my notebook and closed it like a ledger. The quiet rage from the locked drawer had grown into a plan. I would not sit and watch the fire happen this time. I would fight a different kind of fire, one that could be put out with evidence and patience. Frank left with a nod. Keep a record, he said. I already had. I kept quiet and watched. I told myself I would act like an old man who did not know the score. I did not want them to see me moving my pieces. Eric and Tasha danced around the house like it already belonged to them. They bragged about new paint and how easy the paperwork would be. The more they bragged, the more careful I became. I made small moves that looked like nothing. I fixed a light bulb in the hall and hummed. I swept the porch and smiled when neighbors said hello, but I also kept my eyes open. I learned where they left their papers. Tasha left a folder half hidden under the couch the night. She thought I was asleep. The folder had a stack of emails printed and a bank estimate for a co-ownership transfer. I stood still in the dark with the folder in my hands and felt like a man holding a smoking match. Frank and I met at the diner the next morning. He slid a coffee across the booth and watched me while I told him what I had found. He listened without interrupting. Then he leaned in and whispered, "We need proof in your hands and on record." We talked about steps like a code, secure copies, timestamps, witnesses. He wrote notes like a man writing a list for a fire run. When I went back home, I pretended to be stupid and sleepy. I put on my old cardigan and shuffled through the kitchen like a man who had nothing to hide. I watched them in the corner of my eye. Eric tossed his keys on the table and spoke loudly into his phone. He sounded like a man who was counting his wins. Tasha winked at him and my stomach hurt. That night, I left a small recording device, my old flip phone, on the mantel. The screen was dull, but the voice recorder worked. I left it like a coin on a table, a small trap. I also took a photograph of the deed request on the county site and printed it out. Then I put everything in a safe place, my toolbox in the garage, under a loose board where I had hidden tools for years. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and worry. I ate dinner alone at my small table and wrote in my notebook. I listed dates, times, things missing, and what I suspected. Each line felt like a small ember of truth. I was building a fire, yes, but it was a fire to burn their lies, not to ruin anyone. Finally, I closed the notebook and set the badge on top. The badge felt heavy and right. It reminded me that I had run toward danger for 35 years. Now, the danger wore a familiar face and a smile. I tucked the notebook into my drawer and locked it with my new key. I felt ready. The trap was set. I learned to act slow. When they spoke of taking the house, I smiled and said, "That's fine. Make yourself at home." They thought my calm was surrender. They thought I had faded. They were wrong. I spent my mornings like a man learning a new skill. I wrote things down. I asked for receipts when they bought groceries. I checked bank balances when I could. Every small paper I copied into my notebook became a piece of the trail. One afternoon, I went through Eric's pile of mail while he was at work. I told myself it was for safety. I found a draft of a deed with my name signed in a quick hand. The hand looked like mine, but it had no weight. It was the wrong swing of the pen. I took a picture and tucked the paper back in the pile like a detective returning evidence to a scene. The photograph would be proof. I put it on a flash drive and hid it in my toolbox. That evening, they talked loudly about moving forward. "We are doing this next week," Tasha said, pouring wine with a smile. Eric nodded like a man planning his victory party. I kept my face kind and slow like a calm lake. I walked through the halls and hummed a song from the firehouse. I set out plates for dinner. When I sat, they talked about our house as if the word had already changed. At night, I checked the recording on the flip phone. I had left it on the mantel one evening when they thought I had gone to bed. It captured voices, planning tones, names, dates. I listened with the volume low and my heart hot. Tasha said things she should not have said in a house that was not yet hers. Eric joked about signatures and how easy it would be to get it done. Their laughter grated at me like sand. I copied the audio files to my laptop and backed them up in 3 places. I called Frank and whispered updates. He told me to stay patient and to do nothing that would reveal my hand. We were making a quiet plan. I would be the calm man in the corner while the world they built with false signatures began to crack. The slow work of gathering proof felt like drilling into a wall to find a hidden safe. Each step needed care. Each breath had to be steady. I kept my badge polished and my notes tidy. In the quiet before sleep, I touched the badge and felt a quiet promise. I would not be moved from the house I had built with my hands and heart. The trick to this kind of fight was patience. Fire moves fast, but paperwork moves slow. I learned to wait, like embers cooling. I practiced walking around the house as if nothing was wrong. I watered a plant and whistled. I hummed my old alarm song and made tea. It was theater. The audience was dangerous. The performance had to be perfect. One morning, I overheard Tasha talking on the phone about a closing date and a notary. She sounded light, like someone describing a party. I took the words and turned them into a map of what to do next. If they were meeting a notary soon, I needed to make sure I had everything ready before that happened. The clock began to tick. Frank and I met at the public library. He walked in and sat with a paper cup of coffee and a calm face. He showed me forms and explained how forgery appeared on a document. Look at the pressure, he said. Forgeries have wrong weight. The pen moves in a way a person doesn't move. He had studied handwriting for hours. He told me what to look for and how the bank could verify signatures. We made a list of steps. Copy everything, get timestamps, speak to the county clerk, and place calls that would set their actions into the open. At home, I played a role. Eric told guests we would have a housewarming party once everything was sorted. He said it like a man who had already counted the plates. Tasha collected addresses and numbers. They sent invites and bragged about the friends who were a realtor and a mortgage broker. I pretended not to notice those cards. I pretended to nap and drank black coffee to stay awake. When they left one afternoon to show the house to a buyer, I did not move. I sat on the porch like I had all day, reading a newsprint that smelled like the old station. My mind ran through the list Frank and I had made. If they showed the house to a broker, they would sign something. That meant the best time to act would be at their next big announcement. I made plans for the party. If they wanted a show of ownership, I would give them a show they would not forget. The pretense deepened. I played the oblivious father well. I let them talk about our place while I laughed and praised the new curtains. I helped carry boxes and pretended to struggle with small things. My acting was simple. I smiled at neighbors and dodged questions. I let them make the house appear like a home while my notebooks filled with dates and proof. They spoke loudly about a big event, housewarming to show off everything. I listened from my chair while they planned guest lists and menus. Tasha said, "Everyone will see how perfect this is." Eric nodded, "We'll make it official." I felt my stomach tighten with something like cold fire. The party would be their stage. It would be the moment when their friends and the broker would see them as owners. It would also be the moment I could show them the truth. Frank told me to keep a calm face and offered to come as a guest. He would be plain clothes, a friend in a room. He would act like any neighbor coming to congratulate new owners. We planned signals. He would slip in quietly and sit in the back. I would hand him a file without making a scene. The plan felt a little like setting a net. We wanted to catch them while they celebrated. In the days before the party, I prepared more than plates. I copied bank statements and printed the audio files. I wrote down every instance where a bill went missing or a document had disappeared. I wrote in thick letters on the top of the printouts, "Forgery suspected." I hid copies in places where they would not find them. I practiced saying simple lines: "You must stop. You forged my name. Call your lawyer." My voice practiced the weight it needed. The night before the party, I left a small flash drive in the mantel where guests would see it. Just a prop, I told myself. But it mattered. If they reached for it, we would be ready. I slept poorly, waking to the quiet creak of the house. I felt like I had once felt before an alarm, ready to move when the moment came. This was my call. Party morning smelled like lemon cleaner and warm bread. Eric and Tasha moved with an energy that made the whole house spin. They turned on music and set bowls of chips like a buffet line. They placed a large sign outside that read, "Open House, Private Showing." My neighbor stopped by to ask about it and smiled at Eric with polite praise. That smile stung a little. I did not want to ruin anyone's day. I wanted the truth to come out clean. I walked through the house, setting plates of cookies I had baked the night before. I wore my cardigan and a calm face. My hands trembled when I put the last dish down. The living room filled with people, friends of Eric's, a woman who wore a name tag from a local real estate office, a man who carried a mortgage folder. Their voices rose and fell like weather. I watched Eric lead tours. He showed the kitchen with exaggerated pride and called the master bedroom ours. Guests oohed and awed at the new paint. When someone asked, "Didn't this used to be your mom's?" he answered, "Still is on paper. We're just helping with the upgrades." The answer was light and slick like oil. When the first guest asked that question, I walked forward with a padded envelope I had prepared. The paper felt thick in my hands. My heart was steady. I had rehearsed this for days. I told myself to keep the voice level and not to let anger show. I stepped into the room and said, "Speaking of paperwork." People looked up and smiled. That smile froze when they saw the envelope. I set it on the mantel like a seed. Then I opened it. Inside were copies, deed drafts, bank statements, and a small flash drive labeled audio. The room hushed. I handed the copies to a neighbor and said, "I thought you might like to see how the plans were made." The realtor's face flickered. Eric's jaw tightened like a wire. Tasha's smile dropped. I felt the room tilt toward the truth, and I felt oddly light. The silence in the living room felt heavy enough to break glass. Everyone looked at me. Eric blinked first. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, "what are you doing?" I looked at the realtor holding the papers, her fingers stiff and uncertain. "Just sharing some of the family paperwork," I said softly. "Seems my son has been very busy." The realtor frowned, scanning the copies. "This shows a signature yours?" she asked. I nodded. "But that isn't my hand." Tasha moved fast. "You can't prove any of that," she snapped. Her cheeks were red now. "This is private family business." Her voice cracked. Eric stepped toward me, lowering his voice, but not low enough. "You're making a scene, Mom. You need to calm down." The crowd shifted. Some of the guests exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" The question floated like smoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I took out my phone, scrolled to the file, labeled Recording 3, and pressed play. My voice was steady when I said, "You might want to listen." From the speaker came Tasha's voice, clear as day. "Once it's in our name, he can live in the guest room. For optics." Then Eric's voice, smug and quiet. "He won't fight it. He's too old." The room changed. The air itself shifted. The realtor backed up. A few guests stepped toward the door. Tasha's mouth fell open. You can't record us like that," she screamed. "That's illegal." Before I could answer, a calm voice from the doorway said, "Not in this state." Everyone turned. Frank Coleman walked in, plain clothes, badge gleaming from his belt. He smiled politely. "One-party consent law. And I'm that one party's friend." Eric froze. "You planned this," he whispered. I looked at him the way I used to look at a fire I knew I could control. "You started it," I said. Frank nodded at me once, a signal. The trap had closed. Frank stepped fully into the room. His voice stayed calm, the kind of voice that made people listen without knowing why. "Afternoon, folks," he said. "Lovely gathering. Shame about the forged paperwork." Eric's face turned the color of wet clay. You can't prove." Frank held up a folded document. "Actually, I can. Court-approved warrant for evidence seizure. We've been watching for a while." He turned to the realtor. "Ma'am, thank you for being here. You're a witness now." Tasha's hands trembled. "We didn't do anything wrong." Frank gestured to my envelope. "That's your handwriting on the falsified deed, Mrs. Davis?" She didn't answer. He continued, "Anyway, and these signatures, Eric Davis, forging Wilbert Davis's name?" The guests were silent. The music still played softly in the background, something light and cheerful that made the tension feel sharper. Eric's voice cracked. "You're calling the cops on your own son?" I met his eyes, steady as a wall of brick. "You called them first when you forged my name." Frank moved forward, pulling handcuffs from his jacket. The metallic click sounded louder than any fire alarm I'd ever heard. "Eric Davis," he said, "you're under arrest for attempted fraud and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." Tasha screamed, lunging toward him, but two uniformed officers stepped in through the open door. They had been waiting outside. One held her back, while the other read her rights. The realtor backed away slowly, muttering, "I had no idea. I swear I didn't." Her heels clicked against the tile like punctuation marks at the end of a long, ugly sentence. Guests filed out one by one, whispering as they passed me. I stood still while Frank did his job. I didn't need to move or speak. The truth was doing the talking now. When Eric looked up, I saw a flash of the boy he'd been once, before greed and pride hollowed him out. "Dad," he whispered, "please." But there are some fires you can't put out for someone else. After the last car pulled away, silence dropped like a curtain. Only the smell of spilled wine and lemon polish remained. I leaned on the counter. My legs shook, but my hands were steady. Frank stayed behind, taking notes, collecting the envelope and my recordings as evidence. "You did good, Wilbert," he said quietly. "We'll process them both tonight. You're safe now." I nodded. The words landed slow. Safe. I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The house felt strange, hollow. My son's laughter still echoed in the walls. Frank took the forged papers, labeling each with evidence tags. He moved with the same care he'd shown back when we carried people out of burning buildings, steady, focused, unshaken. When he was done, he clapped me on the shoulder. "You stood up for yourself. Most folks don't get that far." I wanted to tell him it didn't feel like winning. It felt like losing something that should never have been lost. He left just before midnight. I locked the door behind him, turned off the porch light, and stood in the dark living room. The open house sign still leaned against the wall. I carried it outside and broke it over my knee. The sound echoed down the empty street. The next morning, I made coffee and opened the paper. My face stared back at me under the headline, "Son's Open House Becomes Sting Operation." The photo showed me shaking Frank's hand on the front steps. Neighbors waved from across the street that day, some curious, some respectful. I waved back but didn't stop to talk. I just wanted quiet. Later, I called Shepard, my lawyer. He had handled my will and knew every legal thread. "Forgery charges stick," he told me. "Deed secure. You'll be fine, Wilbert." Fine. It sounded too small a word for what had happened. That night, I sat in the kitchen, the house silent around me. The walls were mine again. But freedom can be heavy too. A week later, a letter arrived from the county jail. The handwriting on the envelope was clumsy but familiar. I sat at the table, turning it over for a long time before I opened it. "Dad," it began. "I just wanted to build a life. I thought I deserved it. I didn't mean for it to go that far." The letter was short. No real apology, just excuses. Tasha pushed me. "I thought you'd understand. You always said family sticks together." I stared at the page until the words blurred. I could almost hear his voice when he was 10, proud of the birdhouse we built in the backyard. I could see his hands holding the hammer, his grin when the nails went straight. Somewhere between that boy and this man, something had cracked. I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer. "You could have built it beside me," I whispered, "not on me." For a long while I sat there, letting the ache settle. Then I pulled out my notebook, the same one I'd used to record every lie, every date, every small betrayal. On the last page I wrote, "Case closed. Lesson, never confuse love with weakness." That evening, Frank stopped by with a bag of takeout. "Brought you dinner," he said, setting it on the table. "You look better." "I feel lighter," I admitted. We ate in silence. Outside, the sun sank behind the hills, turning the street gold. When he left, I stood at the window and watched his taillights fade. For the first time in months, the house looked peaceful. The weeks rolled by, the noise of reporters died down, and the world turned back to its rhythm. I went back to my routines, morning coffee, small walks, polishing my badge on Sundays. One afternoon, I met with Shepard again. He handed me a new folder. "Everything's settled," he said. "Charges filed, property secured, and the house title reaffirmed in your name. No one can touch it now." I thanked him and told him I wanted to do something useful with what I'd learned. He smiled. "You always do." That night, I filled out a donation form online. I gave part of my savings to the Elder Legal Defense Fund. I named it after my late wife, Margaret. She had always said kindness without strength was just wishful thinking. The house was quiet again. Honest quiet, not the kind that hid secrets. I put every picture back where it belonged. The walls looked like themselves once more. Frank stopped by that weekend with a toolbox. "Time for new locks," he said. Together we replaced every knob and hinge. When he turned the final key, he grinned. "These only open from your side now." That evening, neighbors invited me to speak at the community center. "You should tell folks your story," one said. "It could help others." I agreed. When the night came, I stood at the podium with my badge pinned to my chest and the same envelope that started it all. I lifted it up. "This," I told the room, "is what vigilance looks like. Protect what's yours, and protect yourself from silence." When I got home, the porch lights from that awful party still hung across the rail. I turned them on again. The soft glow lit the yard, gentle and forgiving. I sat beneath them, feeling the cool air brush my face. The house behind me stood still and sure. It was mine again, and this time it would stay that way. I leaned back, smiled, and thought. He called it a housewarming. I called it justice served warm. The following week, I woke early and stepped outside with my coffee. The street was quiet, the desert air cool. It felt strange to breathe without the weight of fear pressing down. Still, a part of me didn't quite trust the peace yet. When you've lived through a fire, you keep smelling smoke even when it's gone. Neighbors waved as they passed on morning walks. Mrs. Riley from 2 houses down stopped at the fence. "Heard about what happened," she said softly. "You did the right thing." "Didn't feel like it," I admitted. She smiled. "Justice never does. But it's still justice." Later, Frank stopped by again, out of uniform this time. He leaned against the porch railing and said, "You're famous, you know. County wants you to speak at a senior safety workshop." "About what?" I asked. "About staying alert. About what you did right." I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to dig through the ashes again. But another part, the firefighter part, knew some good should come of what I'd been through. That weekend, I stood in the small community center, facing 20 people my age or older. Some looked frightened, others curious. I told them everything. How the mail stopped, the forged papers, the locked drawer. I held up my black envelope and said, "This is proof. Keep records. Keep your trust, but keep your eyes open too." When the meeting ended, people lined up to shake my hand. One woman hugged me, tears in her eyes. "You saved more than just your house," she said. "You saved ours too." Driving home, I thought of that. Saving people didn't always mean pulling them out of burning rooms. Sometimes it meant showing them how not to start the fire at all. That night, I sat on the porch again. The sky was purple with the last light of evening. The same string lights from the housewarming hung above me, soft and warm. I smiled to myself. I decided to keep them there, not as a memory of betrayal, but as a reminder that even the worst nights could end in light. A month passed before I received another letter from the jail. This one was shorter than the first. "Dad, I don't expect forgiveness," Eric wrote. "I just hope you're all right. Tasha's gone. She filed for divorce. Maybe that's for the best. There was no signature at the bottom, just his name typed in block letters, neat and cold. I folded the paper and put it in the same drawer as the first. I didn't hate him. I couldn't. But I didn't trust him either. Trust is like glass. Once cracked, it never shines the same again. Later that afternoon, Rosalind from Morning Brew called. She'd heard everything from Frank and wanted to see how I was doing. I still owe you a coffee, she said. When I arrived at her cafe, the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon hit me like comfort. She poured me a cup without asking. You look better, she said. I feel better, I answered. We talked for a long time about her business, about how she'd once fought her own guardianship case. Funny thing, she said, stirring her cup. When family tries to take what's yours, it's not about money. It's about control. I nodded. And dignity, she smiled sadly. That too. Before I left, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a gift card and a note for your next cup on the house. I slipped it into my wallet. Driving home, I realized something simple, but strong. I wasn't alone anymore. I had friends again. Real ones. That evening I pulled out the box of old photographs. My wife, Margaret, smiled at me from a picture in front of this same house, years younger, sunlight in her hair. I did it, love, I whispered. The house is safe. I set the photo on the mantel where it belonged, right next to my badge. September drifted into October. The air grew cooler, and I found myself returning to small joys, painting the porch railing, fixing the old wind chime that hadn't rung in years. The rhythm of normal life came back slowly, like a heartbeat finding its pace again. One morning, Frank stopped by in uniform. Got something for you, he said, handing me a newspaper clipping. It read, Elder Fraud Prevention Bill proposed by local representative after Wilbur Davis case. I stared at it, stunned. They're making a law? Your case started it, Frank said. Guess you're still saving people, huh? The thought warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. Maybe the fight hadn't been just for me after all. That weekend, Rosalind invited me to help paint the outside of her cafe. You still remember how to handle a brush? She teased. Better than I remember how to handle family, I said, and we both laughed. As we worked, people stopped to talk. Some thanked me. Others asked questions. The world had turned my pain into a warning for others, and that made it easier to carry. After the last coat of paint dried, Rosalind brought out 2 cups of coffee, and we sat on the curb, watching the sun dip low. You ever think about starting over somewhere new? She asked. Used to, I said. But this house, this town, it's where I fought my fire. I think I'll stay. She smiled and nodded. Good. Some places deserve to be protected. That night, I walked through my house, turning off lights one by one. Each room felt lighter, freer, brighter than before. Winter came early that year, bringing cold mornings and quiet evenings. I kept busy, volunteering at the firehouse, mentoring young recruits who reminded me of myself 30 years ago. They called me Cap, even though I hadn't worn the uniform in years. It made me grin every time. One afternoon, after a training session, Frank joined me at the diner. County's planning to honor you next month, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was an invitation to an awards banquet for outstanding civil courage. I didn't know what to say. I didn't do anything special, I murmured. He laughed. You stood up to your own kid and saved your house. That's plenty special. The banquet came in December. The mayor handed me a plaque. Flashbulbs popped. I smiled, but in my heart I thought of Margaret. I hoped she'd be proud. Later that night, Rosalind met me outside the hall. She wore a navy coat and a smile that softened the cold. You looked good up there, she said. Couldn't have done it without you, I replied. She took my hand and squeezed it. You did all the hard parts yourself. We stood under the streetlight for a long time, saying nothing. The silence wasn't heavy. It was full of peace. The new year began quietly. I took down the holiday lights and cleaned the yard. The house looked simple again, mine again. I thought about the road that led here. From fear to fury, from fury to justice, and finally to peace. Then one morning, I got a call from a local TV station. They wanted me to share my story for a documentary about elder protection. You're the man who fought back, the reporter said. People need to hear it. I said yes. The interview aired a month later. I watched it sitting in the same living room where it had all happened. They showed my badge, the old black envelope, and a photo of me shaking Frank's hand. At the end, they asked me one final question. If you could say one thing to your son now, what would it be? I looked straight into the camera and answered, you called it a housewarming. I called it justice served warm. The credits rolled, and I sat there for a while, smiling through quiet tears. Then I turned off the TV and walked out to the porch. The string lights glowed softly in night. I poured myself a cup of coffee, breathed in the cool air, and thought of Margaret, of Frank, of Rosalind, and of the long road back to peace. The fire was over. The house still stood, and so did I. Spring came early, the air warm and sweet. I started leaving the windows open again, letting the scent of desert flowers drift inside. Life had grown simple, peaceful. Then one day, while sorting through old boxes in the garage, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a folder labeled Family Trust Draft. I didn't remember creating one. When I opened it, I saw typed lines with my name, my late wife's name, and Eric's name, set up to pass the house upon the current owner's incapacitation. My heart pounded. The date on the document was only 6 months old. Frank was the first person I called. He came right over, still in his uniform. Looks like an old version of your estate plan, he said, scanning the pages. They might have planted this earlier. Probably part of their setup for guardianship. So this was their backup plan, I muttered. Exactly, Frank said. They must have made a copy before you caught on. I stared at the page. I wasn't angry this time, just tired. What do I do with it? He smiled faintly. Keep it. Frame it if you want. It's proof of how far you've come. That night, I sat in my living room holding that folder. I thought about how easy it was to lose control of your life, how quiet betrayal could be until it roared. Then I tucked the folder into the black envelope with everything else. I wasn't scared anymore. Rosalind stopped by later with dinner. Why are you smiling like that? She asked. Because, I said. For once, a ghost from the past showed up, and I didn't flinch. She laughed, sat down beside me, and poured 2 glasses of wine. That's called peace, Wilbert. I looked at her and thought she was right. For the first time in a long while, peace didn't feel like silence. It felt like strength. A few weeks later, the community center invited me again. This time, they wanted me to help run a safety class. I agreed, thinking I'd just speak for 10 minutes. But when the day came, 30 people showed up, men and women my age, faces lined with worry and hope. I stood at the front and held up my envelope again. This, I said, is the fireproof box of my life. Inside is every paper that almost burned me. They listened. I told them how the small signs had started, missing mail, locked drawers, changes in tone, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. I told them that love was good, but proof was better. I taught them how to check property records online, how to freeze credit reports, how to file police reports without shame. When the session ended, a man came up to me and said, "My son's been asking for joint access to my bank account." I thought it was harmless. Now, I'll think twice. That's why I came, I said. Rosalind clapped softly in the back row. You're a teacher now, she teased later as we cleaned up. I guess firefighters don't really retire, I said, smiling. We just switch fires. That evening I walked her home. The stars over Tucson shimmered like tiny lanterns. At her door, she stopped me. You know, she said, you deserve some happiness that isn't about fighting. I wanted to tell her I'd already found it right there beside her, but I only nodded. Maybe I'm finally ready for that. When I got home, the house looked calm, safe, and bright. I hung my badge above the mantel and whispered, "Still saving lives." May rolled around, and Frank invited me to the fire station barbecue. I hadn't been back there in years. When I arrived, the familiar clang of metal and smell of smoke and burgers hit me like a memory. The younger firefighters called out, "Hey, Cap!" Frank waved me over. "The legend returns," he said with a grin. We ate, laughed, told old stories. It felt good, like coming home to a place that still remembered who I was. Halfway through the afternoon, a young recruit sat beside me. "Sir," he said, "I heard about what happened with your son. How did you stay so calm through it?" I thought about that for a moment. When you're in a fire, panic kills faster than flames. You focus on air, exits, and time. This was no different. He nodded slowly. Guess bravery comes in all forms. I looked around at the station, the hoses coiled neatly, the trucks polished like mirrors. Bravery, I said quietly, isn't charging in, it's refusing to run when the heat comes for you. When the event ended, Frank walked me my car. "Proud of you, Wilbert," he said. "You turned pain into purpose." "Maybe," I said, "but I had help." He smiled. "Still, you're the one who fought the fire." Driving home, I realized something simple. The house wasn't just mine again, it was me again. Strong, steady, unburned. In June, I finally did something I hadn't done in years. I took a vacation. Rosalind and I packed up her old car and drove west toward California. The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of sunlight. We stopped at roadside diners, small motels, and beaches that smelled of salt and freedom. At night, we watched the ocean crash against the rocks. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked one evening as we sat on a pier, the wind cool, on our faces. "I used to think next was something that happened to me," I said. "Now I know it's something I choose." She smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder. "That's the best kind of next." We reached San Diego after a week. I stood by the water and breathed deep. For years, my life had been about survival. Now it felt like living again. On the drive back, Rosalind said, "When we get home, promise me you'll do one more thing." "What's that?" I asked. "Plant something new. Flowers, a tree, anything. Just to remind yourself you can still grow." When we pulled into my driveway, 2 days later, the house stood waiting, sun-warmed and safe. I unpacked the car, walked into the yard, and planted a small lemon tree near the porch. As I patted down the soil, I whispered, "Here's to new roots." Summer heat came early. The lemon tree grew fast, its leaves bright against the white fence. I watered it every morning, watching it stretch toward the light. One afternoon, Frank stopped by again. "Looks good," he said, nodding toward the tree. "Rosalind's idea," I said. "She says it's a sign of new beginnings." He smiled. "You've had a few of those." We sat on the porch, sipping iced tea. The sun hung low, turning everything golden. "You know," Frank said, "we're planning to host a big community event next month, Senior Safety Fair. We could use a speaker. Interested?" I chuckled. "You just can't let me retire, can you?" "Not when people need to hear you." I agreed. When the day came, I stood on a small stage at the park, the black envelope beside me once again. I told my story for the last time, how trust had been twisted, how courage had been quiet, and how justice, when it came, felt warm. Afterward, a reporter asked if I had any final advice. I smiled and said, "Lock your doors, trust your gut, and never hand over your life for convenience." That evening, Rosalind and I sat under the porch lights, the same ones that had once witnessed betrayal. They glowed soft and steady. She leaned close and whispered, "You think he'll ever call again?" "Maybe," I said, "and when he does, I'll answer. But I won't open the door." The crickets sang, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. The fair had barely ended when life decided to test me again. A thick white envelope arrived one hot morning, stamped with the state seal. My stomach tightened until I opened it. Inside was a letter from the courthouse. Notice of restitution hearing. Eric was asking for leniency, claiming I'd set him up. I stared at the paper, amazed by the nerve it took to twist the truth even now. I called Shepard, my lawyer. "You think I need to go?" He sighed. "You don't have to, but it might give you closure." So I went. The courthouse looked the same as before, cold marble, the echo of shoes, that smell of paper and judgment. Eric stood at the defendant's table, thinner now, his suit hanging loose. When he saw me, his eyes dropped. His lawyer spoke first. "My client wishes to make amends. He's requesting community service instead of full repayment." Shepard whispered, "Your turn." I stood and faced the judge. Your Honor, I said, I don't want revenge. I want truth. My son forged my name and nearly stole my home. He needs to own that. The judge nodded slowly. Mr. Davis, your father speaks plainly. You will repay what you took. Eric's shoulders slumped. Yes, Your Honor. When court ended, he looked back once. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure yet what forgiveness meant. Outside, Frank was waiting by his cruiser. How'd it go? Justice, I said simply. Again. He grinned. You're getting good at that. I smiled, but it hurt a little too. Justice always did. Weeks passed after the hearing. Summer baked the town, and I spent most mornings tending to the lemon tree. Its leaves had darkened, stronger now. Rosalind said it looked like hope. One afternoon, she brought over a flyer. Look, she said, they're naming the new community legal program after your wife, the Margaret Davis Legal Aid Fund. My throat tightened. You're kidding. Nope. Shepard suggested it. Said it was your idea that started everything. I read the flyer 3 times before I found my voice. She'd like that, I whispered. We attended the opening ceremony together. The mayor spoke about protecting seniors, about courage, about how a small act of standing up could change a city's laws. When he said my name, people clapped. I didn't know where to look. Afterward, a young woman came up to me, eyes bright. My dad almost lost his house last year, she said. Because of you, he didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the porch, sat under the glow of the lights, and listened to the quiet hum of the world. For the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt used up well. Rosalind joined me, coffee mugs in hand. You okay? I was just thinking, I said, sometimes a burned field grows the best grass. She smiled softly. That's the firefighter talking again. Maybe, I said, but he's finally at peace. Autumn came with softer winds and the smell of rain. I had grown used to mornings with Rosalind, 2 coffees, 1 paper, and quiet laughter over the crossword. It wasn't love the way it had been with Margaret, but it was steady, kind, and real. One afternoon, the phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go, but something made me pick up. Dad? The voice froze me. Eric. He spoke quickly, nervously. I'm in a halfway house now. They let me call. I just wanted you to know I'm getting help. I'm different now. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I answered, I hope so. I'm sorry, he said again. I really am. I believed him this time, not fully but enough to hope. After the call, I sat for a long time staring at the lemon tree. Its first small fruit had appeared, bright and yellow, glowing in the sunlight. Rosalind came out and asked, Who is that? My son, I said. She squeezed my shoulder. You okay? Yeah, I said. For the first time, maybe we both are. The next morning, I picked the lemon and set it on the kitchen counter. 1 fruit, 1 beginning. The year turned again. My story had spread beyond Tucson. Reporters called, asking for quotes about family fraud prevention. One magazine even asked if I'd write a short piece titled How I Took My House Back. I agreed, but only if I could end it my way. I wrote, the fire wasn't in the walls. It was in the people I loved. I didn't win by fighting them. I won by refusing to burn. When the article published, letters began to arrive. Real letters, handwritten by people who had gone through the same kind of pain. Some thanked me. Some just needed to be heard. I answered everyone. Rosalind teased me about becoming a local celebrity. You're the hero no one expected, she said one night, laughing as she poured us wine. Heroes run into fires, I said. I just stopped one. She leaned closer. That's exactly what heroes do. Later that week, the community center held a dinner in my honor. Frank gave a speech that made everyone laugh and cry. At the end, he raised his glass. To Wilbert, he said, proof that courage doesn't retire. The toast echoed in the hall. I lifted my glass, smiling. To second chances, I said, by November, the lemon tree had grown taller than the portrail. I decided to host Thanksgiving that year. It felt right, a full circle. I invited Frank and his wife, Shepard and his family, Rosalind of course, and even a few of my old firefighter buddies. I cooked all day, humming to myself as the smell of turkey filled the house. When everyone arrived, the place glowed with laughter. We sat at the same table where a year ago I'd faced betrayal. Now it was surrounded by people who had helped me rebuild. Halfway through dinner, Frank raised his glass. To Wilbert, he said again, grinning, who turned a housewarming into justice served warm. Everyone laughed, and I did too. Later, after dessert, I stepped outside. The night air was cool, the stars sharp above the roofline. I could hear Rosalind's voice through the open window, soft and sure. I looked at the lemon tree heavy with new fruit and whispered, "You called it a housewarming. I called it justice served warm." The wind stirred the branches, as if agreeing. I stood there for a while, the lights twinkling above, the house solid behind me, the past finally resting where it belonged, far behind, and no longer burning. The winter that followed was quiet and bright. Morning started with coffee and the sound of birds. I finally had what I used to pray for, peace that didn't come from silence, but from safety. One cold January morning, I was shoveling leaves near the porch when a letter slid through the mail slot. It was from Eric again. My first instinct was to throw it away, but I hesitated. Something in the handwriting looked steadier. I opened it slowly. "Dad," it began, "I've been working steady at the halfway house. They're letting me help in maintenance. I want to pay you back someday. I know money can't fix it, but I'm trying to be better. Please don't give up on me completely." I read it twice. The words weren't perfect, but they sounded real. I folded the paper and placed it on the mantel beside the lemon from last summer, the first fruit of something new. That night, Rosalind noticed it and asked softly, "Are you ready to forgive him?" "Not yet," I said, "but maybe I'm ready to start." She nodded, taking my hand. "That's enough for today." After she left, I sat in the quiet living room and realized something. I had built walls for protection, but maybe it was time to build a door again. A few weeks later, Frank called. "Guess who's asking to meet with Adult Protective Services?" I frowned. "Who?" "Your son. Wants to volunteer there. They said he mentioned your case, called it his wake-up call." For a moment, I didn't speak. I didn't know how to feel. Angry? Proud? Both? Frank chuckled softly. "People can change, Wilbert. Sometimes they just need to see themselves from the outside." That night, I thought about the first day Eric had shown up at my door with his boxes. I remembered his easy grin, his promises of just a few weeks. I'd lost the son I knew that day, but maybe I was getting a different one back. Rosalind came by with soup and caught me lost in thought. "You're thinking about him," she said. I admitted, "but it's different now. I'm not afraid anymore." She smiled. "That's healing." When she left, I stood on the porch again. The lemon tree swayed in the wind, its branches reaching higher than ever. Growth, messy, uneven, but real. Maybe that was what forgiveness looked like, too. In March, the city invited me to a luncheon honoring local community guardians. The phrase made me smile. Once, I'd been the one needing guarding. Now, I was being thanked for it. At the event, I sat beside Shepard and Rosalind. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the podium, cleared my throat, and said, "I never thought I'd be up here for anything other than firefighting. But it turns out protecting people doesn't stop when the fires go out." People clapped, but I kept going. "If you remember one thing, let it be this. Don't let anyone convince you that growing older means growing powerless. The moment you stop believing in your own strength, someone else will try to use it." When the applause faded, I spotted Frank grinning from the back. After the ceremony, he said, "You sure you don't want to run for office?" "Frank," I said, laughing, "I barely run my lawn mower." Rosalind slipped her arm through mine. "That's what makes you perfect for it." We all laughed, and for once, it didn't feel like surviving. It felt like living. Spring brought another letter, this time not from Eric, but from the prison chaplain. "Your son has completed his restitution payments and volunteer hours," it read. "He asked us to tell you he's found faith." I folded the letter slowly and felt something shift inside me. Not closure exactly, but calm. That weekend, I drove out to the halfway house. I didn't tell anyone. I just needed to see for myself. Eric was outside painting a fence. When he saw me, his eyes went wide, unsure whether to run or smile. I stepped closer. "Looks good," I said. "Trying to make things right," he answered softly. We stood there for a moment in silence, just the sound of the brush scraping wood. Then I said, "You can stop trying to make things right. Just start living right." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Thanks, Dad." Driving home, I realized something strange. Letting go didn't weaken me. It made me lighter. The fire was gone, the smoke cleared. All that remained was open air. 35 the year, turned one more time. My lemon tree was full of fruit now, bright and heavy. I picked one, sliced it, and dropped it into a glass of cold water. It tasted sharp, alive. Rosalind and I sat on the porch together that evening, the sunset painting the sky gold. She said, "You ever think about selling this place and starting somewhere new?" I shook my head. Every scar in these walls tells a story. I'd rather live with them than forget them. She smiled. "Then this is home." Frank joined us later, bringing his guitar. He played softly while the night settled around us. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for trouble. I was just here. Before heading in, I looked around, the porch lights, the tree, the old firefighter badge glinting through the window. My life wasn't perfect, but it was honest again. And as the stars came out, I thought of the last thing I'd told the reporter. He called it a housewarming. I called it justice served warm. This time, though, it didn't sound like revenge. It sounded like peace. 36 summer came again, and the world felt wide open. The city hosted a small festival in the park, live music, food stalls, laughter. I hadn't gone in years, but Rosalind talked me into it. "You need to see what you helped build," she said. We walked hand in hand through the crowds. I recognized faces, neighbors, firefighters, even people who had attended the safety workshops months ago. Several stopped me just to say thank you. At one booth, a teenager handed me a pamphlet. "Elder Safety Starts at Home." It read, with a quote from me printed under it, "Courage doesn't retire." I couldn't help but smile. Later, as the sun set, Frank joined us. "Guess what, hero?" he said, grinning. "They're dedicating a bench to you near the firehouse." Says, "For a man who never stopped fighting the right fires." My throat tightened. "You all are trying to make an old man cry." Rosalind laughed softly beside me. "Let them," she said. That night, we sat under the stars on that same bench. Kids ran through the park, lights twinkled above, and I realized I'd come full circle from fear to fire to freedom. The bench would outlast me. That felt right. 37 September rolled in with cooler nights. I'd started writing letters to Eric again, short, careful ones. We kept it simple, weather, work, small updates. He sent one back every week. The pain between us was still there, but so was something new, effort. One afternoon, Rosalind found me reading one of his letters on the porch. "You look lighter," she said. "Maybe I am," I replied. "It's like breathing after smoke." She smiled. "Healing looks good on you." That evening, we had dinner with Frank and his wife. Laughter came easily. For once, I didn't flinch when someone mentioned family. After they left, I walked into the living room. The lemon tree's reflection shimmered in the window glass. The house glowed softly, warm and safe. I thought about that first night when Eric had brought his boxes and his lies. I'd been weak then, scared of losing what I loved. But strength, I learned, isn't about holding on. It's about letting go of fear. And now, fear had finally let go of me. 38 in October, Frank called with an idea. "We're starting a new mentorship program at the firehouse," he said, "for retirees like you. We could use someone who knows what real courage looks like." I laughed. "You mean someone who can still swing a hammer but needs 2 days to recover?" He chuckled. "Exactly." So I joined. Every Thursday, I taught new recruits about decision-making, ethics, and calm under pressure. I told them that fires weren't just made of smoke and heat, they were made of panic, pride, and poor choices too. One young man raised his hand once and asked, "What's the scariest thing you ever faced?" I thought about it, then answered honestly. "It wasn't a fire," I said. "It was watching people I love turn against me and deciding not to become like them." The room went silent. Then someone clapped. That day, I realized my story wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about teaching others to stay human, even when the world burned around them. When I got home that night, Rosalind had dinner ready. "How was class?" she asked. "Best job I ever had," I said. And this time, nobody got burned. 39 by November, it was time for another Thanksgiving. A full year since that so-called housewarming. Rosalind and I decided to keep it small, just her, Frank and his wife, and me. We cooked together, laughing as we burned the first pie. The house filled with the smell of roasted turkey and safety. Before dinner, I stepped out onto the porch alone. The string lights still hung there, glowing softly. The lemon tree was taller now, strong and full of fruit. I picked one and rolled it in my hand, feeling the weight of everything I'd lived through. Inside, laughter spilled from the kitchen. Real laughter, the kind that made a house feel alive. I thought about Eric again. Maybe one day he'd come back, not as a threat or a stranger, but as a son who had learned what home truly meant. And if he ever did, I'd open the door. Carefully but willingly. I took a deep breath, set the lemon on the porch rail, and whispered, "You called it a housewarming. I called it justice served warm." This time, the words made me smile. 40 the next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. I brewed coffee and stood looking out at the lemon tree. Its yellow fruit glowed in the soft light. A year ago, I had sat here bruised and broken, wondering if my life was over. Now it was full again. Rosalind came up behind me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and rested her chin on my shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. I smiled, just thinking how strange life is. I lost everything and somehow I got more back. She squeezed gently. "That's how life works when you fight for it." Frank stopped by later with a newspaper. On the front page was a photo of me, Rosalind, and the community center team. The headline read, "Justice served warm. One man's story sparked statewide reform." I laughed out loud. They really used it. Frank grinned. "Told you it'd stick." That night, I sat on the porch one last time under the glowing lights. I could almost hear Margaret's voice in the wind, soft and proud. I raised my glass of lemonade, fresh from my own tree, and whispered, "To every fire I fought, to every lesson learned, and to justice served warm." The lights swayed gently above me, the house stood firm behind me, and peace finally took its seat beside me for good. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts and comments. Thanks.